The Men Who Weren't There. The world knows the story of June 6, 1944. We know it in steel-grey footage and the grainy, kinetic horror of Robert Capa's photographs. We know the Higgins boats crashing against the shingle, the ramps dropping into a buzzsaw of MG-42 machine gun fire, and the crimson tide washing over the sand of a beach codenamed Omaha. It was a victory measured in yards and paid for in blood. But the story of the liberation of Europe, the story we think we know, has a phantom limb. It has a hole in the narrative deliberately cut out by military censors, a secret held so tightly that the men who lived it couldn't tell their wives, their children, or their therapists for more than 50 years. While the 1st and 29th Divisions were fighting for their lives on the beaches, another, stranger unit was preparing to land. And while the main invasion force was armed with M1 Garands, Sherman tanks, and heavy artillery, this new unit was armed with something else entirely: rubber, speakers, and paint. This is not the story of the men who fought the war. This is the story of the men who faked it. 6 weeks after D-Day, in the suffocating heat of the Normandy bocage, a young lieutenant from New York named Fred Fox found himself in a precarious position. He was commanding a convoy of half-tracks and trucks near the shattered town of Saint-Lô. His orders were simple: move his unit forward, make noise, and look big. The problem was, his unit was a lie. A German reconnaissance plane, a Fieseler Storch, droned overhead. Fox didn't order his men to hide. He ordered them to get busier. Down the road, a team of 4 soldiers was wrestling with the tread of an M4 Sherman tank. They grunted and cursed, but they were not mechanics. One was a set designer from Broadway, another a painter from Philadelphia, and the tank itself weighed only 93 pounds. It was a balloon. From the Storch's vantage point at 3,000 feet, the scene below was terrifying. An entire American armored division, the 6th Armored, by the looks of their divisional markings, was massing for a breakout. There were tanks parked in the orchards, artillery batteries dug in near a crossroads, and motor pools bustling with activity. The German pilot dutifully marked his map: Schwere Panzerverband, heavy tank formation. He wheeled his plane around and sped back toward German lines. The trap was set. On the ground, Lieutenant Fox let out a breath. The tanks were meticulously crafted inflatables from the US Rubber Company. The artillery was a collection of dummy barrels and burlap. The bustling motor pool was just 15 men driving the same 2 trucks in a continuous, dusty circle. And the sound, the grinding, clanking, rumbling sound of an entire division on the move, was coming from a single half-track parked in a camouflaged barn, blasting a curated soundtrack from a massive 500-watt speaker. This was Fox's unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the first mobile deception unit in the history of the US Army. They were, in every sense of the word, a ghost army.
Their mission was not to kill the enemy, but to fool him, to pull his panzer divisions away from the real Allied attacks, to be the magician's left hand, the grand distracting gesture, while the right hand performed the trick. This operation, one of their first, was a test. General Patton's Third Army was preparing for the Cobra breakout, the maneuver that would shatter the German lines in Normandy. But Patton had a gap in his line, a vulnerable, thinly held sector. If the Germans discovered it, they could drive a wedge through the Allied front and potentially throw them back into the sea. The 23rd was plugged into that gap. For 8 days, 1,100 men, armed with rubber and sound, had to pretend to be the 30,000-man 6th Armored Division. The story of the Ghost Army does not begin in the halls of the Pentagon. It begins in a dormitory at the Pratt Institute of Art in Brooklyn, in the sound studios of RCA in New Jersey, and in the casting offices of Hollywood. It was the brainchild of men who believed that the creative mind was a weapon, that an artist's eye for detail could be as lethal as a sniper's. They were recruited by cryptic letters seeking men of high IQ and creative temperament who were willing to serve their country in an unusual way. They were actors asked to impersonate generals in French cafes to spread disinformation. They were sound engineers who spent nights on the Italian front line, recording the specific acoustic signature of a German mortar versus an American one. They were painters who learned that the difference between a real tank and a fake one from the air was the quality of its shadow. And they were soldiers. They carried M1s, but their primary defense was their performance. They operated on the thin line, the most dangerous part of the front, often setting up their illusions less than a mile from German machine guns. If the illusion failed, if the Germans realized the division challenging them was just a platoon of artists, they would be annihilated. Their story was locked away in classified archives. When they returned home, they were sworn to secrecy for life. They went back to their lives. Bill Blass went from painting camouflage on rubber tanks to designing dresses for first ladies. Ellsworth Kelly went from designing decoy patches to becoming one of the 20th century's most celebrated abstract painters. They never spoke of what they did. They watched movies about D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, knowing that the official histories were missing the phantom variable that had made so many of those victories possible. This book is the story of that variable. It is the story of the artists who staged the greatest show on Earth, on the most dangerous stage in the world, for an audience they were desperate to deceive. It is the story of the men who, when the war demanded steel, gave it illusion,